The avoidant will almost inevitably attempt to return after a period of separation or after relationship ended, will reach out with breadcrumb contacts testing your receptiveness, will express regret about how relationship ended, will communicate they have been thinking about you and missing you, will suggest meeting to talk or catching up, will create opportunities for reconnection through mutual friends or through appearing in places you frequent. This return attempt will feel significant because it contradicts their previous patterns of withdrawal and emotional unavailability. Suddenly they are pursuing rather than withdrawing. Suddenly they are expressing emotion rather than maintaining defended detachment. Suddenly they appear vulnerable and interested rather than defended and distant. The return will activate hope that perhaps they have changed. Perhaps losing you created breakthrough that your presence could not create. Perhaps time apart generated growth that makes reconnection viable when relationship was not viable before. Yet the return attempt almost never represents genuine change capacity that would make different relationship outcome possible. Almost never reflects therapeutic work addressing defended patterns. Almost never demonstrates developed ability to sustain intimate reciprocal partnership. Almost never indicates restructured defenses that would prevent repetition of patterns that made original relationship unsustainable. The return instead represents defended response to specific triggers. They attempted to replace you and failed recognizing you. Provided what replacements cannot provide, they experience consequences of their patterns through losing you and want to reverse consequences. Without addressing patterns that created consequences, they feel lonely in their defended isolation and remember you provided relief from loneliness without requiring them to fundamentally change. They are activated by your unavailability, which paradoxically increases their desire in ways your availability never increased desire. They want to restore a comfortable position your presence provided without developing capacity to reciprocate adequately or to meet your legitimate needs. Letting them back in recreates the exact dynamic that necessitated ending original relationship. Recreates cycle where they pursue initially, then withdraw once intimacy exceeds defended tolerance. Recreates pattern where they provide just enough engagement to keep you invested, then deactivate when your needs for consistency and emotional availability trigger their defenses. Recreates harm where you sacrifice your needs and your well-being to accommodate their defended limitations while receiving inadequate reciprocation that slowly erodes your sense of worth and your clarity about deserving adequate partnership. The return attempt is not second chance at healthy relationship. It is invitation back into dysfunctional dynamic. Their unchanged patterns will recreate regardless of how genuine their current expressions of regret or desire appear, regardless of how much you want to believe this time will be different, regardless of how compelling the hope feels that perhaps they finally recognize your value and have developed capacity to treat you as your value deserves. Their return is crisis-driven activation, not genuine growth or change capacity. The avoidance decision to return and attempt reconnection stems from crisis they are experiencing rather than from genuine therapeutic work or developed insight and capacity. The crisis includes specific elements that make reaching out to you feel urgent and necessary, despite their defended preference for managing difficulties independently without requiring support or connection. They are experiencing painful loneliness that their defended isolation creates. Loneliness that becomes intolerable once the initial relief of escaping relationships' intimacy demands fades, and they face the emptiness their defended structure generates when no partner exists to provide relief from that emptiness. They attempted to replace you with new partners and failed to find anyone who provides what you provided. Failed replacement forces, recognition that what you offered was exceptional rather than ordinary baseline. They assumed they could easily find elsewhere, creates panic that they lost irreplaceable person rather than person they could readily replace. They are facing consequences of their patterns that losing you represents, facing that their defended limitations cost them valuable relationship, facing that patterns prevent them from having intimate partnership they claim to want, facing that continued patterns will likely result in continued loss of valuable people. They observe or learn you are thriving without them. Observation threatens ego that depended on believing you needed them and would struggle without them, creates urgency to reconnect before you move on, completely making reconnection impossible. They experienced trigger that reminded them of you, saw something that activated memories, heard song you shared, visited place you went together. Trigger activated suppressed feelings about you that their defenses usually keep contained. created temporary emotional flooding that breaks through defended barriers, making reconnection feel necessary to relieve activated feelings. The crisis-driven nature of return reveals itself through timing and presentation that demonstrates return serves their immediate needs rather than representing genuine change capacity for relationship. The timing coincides with their crisis. They reach out when replacement failed, when loneliness became intolerable, when they learned you are moving on, rather than reaching out after a sustained period of therapeutic work, developing different capacities. The presentation focuses on their feelings and their needs. They express how much they miss you, how much losing you affected them, how much they want to see you, rather than demonstrating understanding of how their patterns affected you or accountability for harm their defended behavior created. The contact emphasizes relieving their current distress, wants to talk, wants to meet, wants to reconnect now, rather than expressing commitment to addressing patterns or willingness to demonstrate change capacity before expecting you to reconsider relationship. The crisis-driven activation particularly manifests through intensity that exceeds their previous demonstrated capacity for emotional expression and pursuit. During relationship, they were emotionally unavailable. Now they express intense feelings about missing you and wanting you back. During relationship, they withdrew and deactivated. Now they pursue with apparent urgency and dedication. During relationship, they minimized your importance. Now they emphasize how much you matter and how much they regret losing you. This sudden intensity appears like breakthrough or transformation, appears like they finally developed capacity for emotional availability and consistent pursuit they lacked during relationship. Yet intensity stems from crisis activation rather than from developed capacity. Stems from panic about losing you permanently, from desperation about failed replacement attempts, from temporary flooding of suppressed feelings that crisis triggered, rather than from sustainable changed ability to engage emotionally and pursue consistently. The crisis activation has predictable trajectory that reveals it is not sustainable transformation. Initial period after reconnection includes continued intensity as crisis remains active. They continue pursuing, continue expressing emotion, continue demonstrating apparent investment that feels like changed capacity. Yet as crisis resolves, as they secure your renewed investment, as loneliness is relieved through restored access to you, as panic about permanent loss subsides because you are available again, the intensity diminishes and familiar defended patterns reassert. They begin withdrawing again as intimacy, your renewed presence exceeds defended tolerance. They deactivate emotionally as your needs for consistency and reciprocation trigger defended resistance. They minimize relationship importance again as your investment threatens their defended autonomy. Within weeks or months, the dynamic returns to previous unsustainable pattern where you provide maximum while they provide minimum, where you tolerate their defended limitations while your needs remain unmet, where relationship limps forward through your accommodation until patterns again become intolerable, requiring another painful ending. Understanding return is crisis-driven activation rather than genuine growth, allows recognition that apparent change is temporary override of defenses rather than restructured defensive capacity. Crisis creates urgency that temporarily overpowers defended resistance to intimacy and vulnerability, similar to how adrenaline allows temporary physical feats that cannot be sustained once crisis passes. Yet temporary crisis-driven override is not genuine change in defensive structure. Genuine change requires sustained therapeutic work over months or years, requires trauma-informed therapy addressing attachment wounds, requires practicing vulnerability in therapeutic relationship where safety can be established, requires developing emotional awareness and regulation capacity, requires examining defenses and understanding what triggers them. Genuine change persists regardless of external circumstances because change reflects restructured internal defensive organization rather than crisis-driven temporary override. The avoidant returning without evidence of this therapeutic work demonstrates return stems from crisis rather than growth, stems from their immediate need for relief from consequences and loneliness rather than from developed capacity to sustain healthy reciprocal partnership. Their crisis makes reconnection feel urgent to them, yet their urgency serves their needs, not your well-being, reflects their discomfort, not their growth, indicates their desperation, not their changed capacity. Responding to crisis-driven return by allowing them back in subjects you to inevitable repetition when crisis passes, and familiar patterns reassert, subjects you to experiencing temporary intensity, followed by familiar withdrawal, to hoping apparent change is real, followed by recognizing patterns remain unchanged, to renewed cycle of accommodation and unmet needs that will again become intolerable, requiring another painful departure. The crisis-driven return is not opportunity for different relationship outcome. It is set up for repetition of same harmful dynamic. Their unchanged defensive capacity will inevitably recreate once crisis motivation fades and defended patterns resume their familiar relationship-destroying operation. You already gave them the best version of yourself. They couldn't handle it then and can't now. The relationship you already had with the avoidant represented you at your maximum investment and accommodation, represented you providing the best, most understanding, most patient version of yourself that you were capable of providing. You offered exceptional emotional intelligence, understanding their defended psychology with sophisticated accuracy most partners would never achieve. You demonstrated extraordinary patience, tolerating patterns that would have ended most relationships within weeks or months. You provided generous accommodation, adjusting your needs downward and sacrificing your legitimate requirements to maintain relationship despite their defended limitations. You gave consistent, loyal investment, remaining committed through difficulties when most people would have protected themselves through leaving much earlier. You were emotionally available, offering support and understanding and presence that made them feel known in unprecedented ways. You did relationship work they refused to do, maintaining connection and managing emotional labor, and creating experiences they would not create independently. This maximum version of yourself, this best you could possibly be as partner, proved insufficient to make relationships sustainable with their defended capacity. Your understanding did not make them feel safe enough to lower defenses and engage intimately. Your patience did not provide them enough time to develop reciprocation capacity. They continued lacking regardless of time provided. Your accommodation did not reduce your needs enough to make your remaining needs feel manageable to their defended limitations. Your investment did not inspire their reciprocal investment, but instead allowed them to remain comfortable providing minimum while you provided maximum. Your emotional availability did not develop their emotional availability, but instead allowed them to continue suppressing while accessing emotions vicariously through you. Your relationship work did not motivate them to share work, but instead enabled them to remain passive while you managed everything. The fact that your best version proved insufficient reveals that problem was never your inadequacy, but was always their defended incapacity. You were not inadequate partner who failed to provide what would have made relationship work. You were exceptional partner whose exceptional provision proved insufficient because their defended limitations prevented them from sustaining relationship, regardless of how perfectly partner met their stated needs or provided ideal conditions. You were not lacking in understanding, patience, accommodation, or investment. You provided these qualities in exceptional abundance that proved these qualities alone cannot make relationships sustainable with someone whose defenses prevent intimate reciprocal engagement. You could not love them enough, understand them enough, be patient enough, sacrifice enough to compensate for their defended inability to reciprocate adequately or to tolerate sustained intimacy. Letting them back in means providing same maximum version of yourself that already proved insufficient, means giving same understanding, patience, accommodation, investment that did not and cannot make relationship with their unchanged defended capacity sustainable. They return expecting or hoping you will again provide what you already provided, will again understand their patterns, will again tolerate their withdrawal, will again accommodate their limitations, will again invest despite minimal reciprocation. Yet you already gave them all these things in maximum measure you were capable of giving. You already provided the best partnership you are capable of providing. You already sacrificed yourself extensively attempting to make relationship work despite their patterns. Providing same things again generates same outcome, generates temporary period where your maximum provision allows relationship to limp forward, followed by inevitable breakdown when your maximum provision again proves insufficient to compensate for their defended incapacity. The reality that your best version was insufficient also means that any changes you might make to yourself cannot solve the fundamental problem their defended limitations created. You might believe that if you were more understanding, more patient, more accommodating, less demanding, less needy, more independent, then relationship would work. Yet you already provided understanding, patience, and accommodation at exceptional levels that exceeded reasonable relationship standards. You already adjusted expectations downward extensively, already tolerated patterns that fell far below adequate baseline, already sacrificed your needs in ways that harmed your well-being. The problem was never that you were insufficiently understanding or excessively demanding. Problem was that their defended capacity was insufficient for healthy relationship, regardless of how much you understood or how little you demanded. Making yourself smaller, more accommodating, less needy does not solve their defended limitations. It only requires you to sacrifice more of yourself for relationship that remains unsustainable because their incapacity, rather than your inadequacy, is fundamental barrier. Understanding you already gave best version of yourself that proved insufficient allows recognition that reconnection cannot produce different outcome without genuine change on their part, without therapeutic work developing capacities they lacked during original relationship. Your best version already encountered their defended limitations, and those limitations prevented sustainable partnership despite your exceptional provision. Their defended limitations remain unchanged in absence of therapeutic work addressing those limitations. Therefore, reconnection between your unchanged best version and their unchanged defended limitations recreates original dynamic, where your maximum provision proves insufficient to compensate for their minimal capacity. Different outcome requires different variables, requires them developing different capacity through therapeutic work, rather than you providing different version of yourself when you already provided best version you are capable of being. The recognition that your best was insufficient also protects you from self-blame or from belief that you failed to provide what would have made relationship work. You did not fail. You provided exceptional partnership that would have created sustainable, healthy relationship with partner who had capacity for reciprocal intimacy. You were not inadequate. You demonstrated qualities and capacities that made you valuable partner. Any person with healthy attachment capacity would treasure and reciprocate. The relationship failed not because you were lacking, but because their defended limitations made them incapable of sustaining partnership, regardless of how exceptional partner was or how much that partner provided. Recognizing this protects you from diminishing yourself further, attempting to become partner who would be sufficient for their insufficient capacity, protects you from believing you need to sacrifice more, understand more, be more patient, demand less when you already sacrificed extensively and provided exceptionally without those provisions making relationships sustainable with someone whose defended incapacity, rather than your inadequacy, was and remains fundamental barrier to healthy partnership. The temporary change performance will cost you months of healing progress you've already made. You have spent weeks or months or longer recovering from relationship and rebuilding yourself after painful ending. Spent time processing grief about loss, understanding patterns that made relationship unsustainable, recognizing your own role including excessive accommodation and tolerance of inadequate treatment, rebuilding sense of worth that relationship eroded through chronic unmet needs and inadequate reciprocation, establishing clearer boundaries and standards for future relationships, redirecting energy toward your own life and goals and well-being rather than organizing life around accommodating partners' defended limitations. This healing and rebuilding represents significant progress toward recovering yourself and toward developing capacity to recognize and require adequate partnership rather than accepting treatment that falls below reasonable standards. Letting the avoidant back in destroys this progress by returning you to dynamic that created original harm requiring healing. Their temporary change performance, their initial pursuit and emotional expression and apparent investment creates hope that relationship can work this time, that your healing work prepared you to maintain boundaries while their growth prepared them to reciprocate adequately. Yet temporary performance is not sustainable change, is crisis-driven override that will fade once crisis passes and they secure your renewed investment. Within weeks or months, familiar patterns reassert as temporary override fades and defended structure resumes normal operation. They withdraw again, activating your anxiety about relationship status and their investment. They deactivate emotionally, leaving your needs unmet again. They minimize relationship, triggering your doubt about your importance to them. They demonstrate same defended limitations that necessitated original ending. The resumed patterns force you to begin healing process again from beginning, force you to again process pain about their withdrawal, Again, question your worth when they demonstrate through patterns that you are not important enough to motivate their adequate engagement. Again, sacrifice yourself, attempting to maintain relationship through your maximum provision, despite their minimal reciprocation. Again, organize life around accommodating their patterns rather than pursuing your independent goals. The resumed patterns also create additional harm beyond original harm, because now you face that you allowed them back despite knowing their patterns, that you ignored warning signs hoping things would be different, that you sacrificed healing progress you made for temporary performance, that you recognized even while hoping represented genuine change. This additional self-blame and self-doubt compounds original harm, making healing harder than if you had maintained boundaries preventing their return. The temporary change performance particularly costs you by creating extended period of hoping and trying before patterns fully reassert and you must face relationship remains unsustainable. Initial weeks or months after reconnection include their continued performance, maintaining hope that change is real. They continue pursuing, continue expressing emotion, continue demonstrating apparent investment. During this period, you invest again, hoping performance indicates genuine transformation. You lower boundaries you established. You sacrifice goals you were pursuing independently. You redirect energy back toward relationship and toward accommodating their needs. You suppress doubts when small signs emerge that patterns are returning. Tell yourself you are being too suspicious or too harsh. Convince yourself to be patient, giving them time to adjust. Rationalize warning signs as temporary regression, rather than recognizing as inevitable return of defended patterns. This extended hoping and trying period delays your recognition that patterns remain unchanged and relationship remains unsustainable. Delays by weeks or months the inevitable conclusion that reconnection was mistake and ending must occur again. Those weeks or months represent time you could have spent continuing healing and moving forward. Time instead spent investing in relationship that was always going to fail again, accommodating patterns that were always going to reassert, hoping for change that was never going to materialize. Without therapeutic work, they demonstrate no evidence of engaging. When you finally face that patterns have returned and relationship must end again, you have lost those weeks or months of potential healing progress. You are further from recovered self than you were before reconnection, are more damaged by resumed patterns, more confused by temporary performance followed by familiar disappointment, more doubtful of your judgment for allowing them back despite knowledge their patterns would likely repeat. The cost also includes damage to your clarity and your boundaries that reconnection creates. Before reconnection, you had developed understanding that their patterns made relationship unsustainable, had established boundary that you would not continue tolerating inadequate treatment, had built clarity that you deserved better than what they provided. Reconnection undermines this understanding, clarity, and boundaries by demonstrating you will soften standards when they perform temporary change, will allow them back, despite patterns, will sacrifice clarity you developed when hope emerges that maybe things can be different. This undermining makes future boundary maintenance harder, makes you doubt whether your standards are too rigid if you enforced them before but abandoned them for reconnection, makes you question your clarity about their patterns if you allowed them back hoping patterns had changed, makes maintaining boundaries in future feel hypocritical when you failed to maintain boundaries that allowed their return. Understanding that temporary change performance will cost months of healing progress allows recognition that protecting your progress requires maintaining boundaries, preventing their return. Your healing progress represents valuable achievement, represents recovering yourself, understanding patterns, developing standards, rebuilding worth. Protecting this progress requires refusing to sacrifice it for temporary performance that will fade, leaving you damaged and needing to begin healing again. The avoidance return is not opportunity for different relationship outcome, is threat to healing progress you made, is invitation back into dynamic that will damage you again, is test of whether you will maintain boundaries protecting yourself or will sacrifice yourself again for person whose unchanged defended capacity will recreate harm you already healed from once and should not subject yourself to healing from again. Maintaining boundaries means refusing contact when they reach out, regardless of how compelling their expressions of regret or desire feel. Maintaining boundaries means not responding to breadcrumbs testing your receptiveness. Maintaining boundaries means not meeting them to talk or catch up when meetings create opportunity for them to perform change and activate your hope. Maintaining boundaries means remembering that you already gave them best version of yourself, and that version proved insufficient to make relationships sustainable with their defended limitations. Maintaining boundaries means protecting healing progress by refusing to sacrifice progress for temporary performance that will cost you months of rebuilding when performance fades and you must again extract yourself from dynamic their unchanged patterns create. The maintenance protects not just your healing progress, but protects your future by refusing to waste more time on person who demonstrated through sustained patterns they cannot provide adequate partnership, regardless of how genuine their temporary crisis-driven return attempt appears. Do not let this person back in. Protecting yourself requires maintaining the boundary that their patterns necessitated establishing, requires honoring the healing work you did by refusing to sacrifice that work for performance that will prove temporary. Leaving you again requiring healing from harm, their defended incapacity will inevitably recreate when crisis passes and familiar patterns resume their destructive operation.